The night it began, the city of Los Angeles pulsed with its usual energy. Skyscrapers glimmered against the velvet sky, and traffic hummed along freeways like veins pumping life into a body. Yet, beneath this urban heartbeat, something ancient stirred. At first, it was dismissed. Reports of flickering lights, strange smells of sulfur wafting through the downtown streets, and shadows dancing unnaturally in alleyways were shrugged off as power outages or overactive imaginations. But when the earth trembled, subtle yet distinct, the unease became harder to ignore. Then came the fire. The first flames. The first sign of the inferno was a plume of smoke rising ominously from Griffith Park. Tourists at the observatory saw it first, a faint, curling tendril that twisted and stretched into the twilight sky. Within moments, flames erupted, consuming dry brush and climbing the hills with an almost sentient hunger. Emergency services were swift to respond, but the fire defied them. It spread with unnatural speed, leaping across fire breaks and doubling back on itself as if it had a mind of its own. Witnesses swore they heard whispers carried on the wind, low, guttural voices murmuring in a language no one could understand. A city on edge. By midnight, the fire had spread to the Hollywood Hills. Evacuation orders were issued, and panic rippled through the city. Families packed what they could into cars and fled, their taillights glowing red against the encroaching darkness. Yet, no matter how far they drove, the fire seemed to follow. Strange reports flooded 911 dispatch. Drivers claimed the flames took on shapes, twisting into humanoid forms with elongated arms and hollow eyes. A jogger in Runyon Canyon described a wall of fire that spoke her name before engulfing the trail. In Koreatown, a group of firefighters vanished after entering a burning building, their screams echoing over the radio before cutting to static. Whispers of the forgotten. By dawn, the city was unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to smoldering ash, and the fire showed no signs of stopping. That was when the historian emerged. Dar. Evelyn Morrow was an unassuming woman, her gray hair always pulled into a tight bun and her glasses perpetually perched on the tip of her nose. She had spent her life studying Los Angeles's history, digging through archives and forgotten tomes. When she saw the fire on the news, something clicked in her mind. A story, buried deep in the annals of time, surfaced. In the late 1700s, when the city was still a Spanish settlement, a sect of missionaries had reportedly dabbled in forbidden rituals. They sought to summon an entity they called El Fuego Santo, the Holy Fire, believing it would purify the land and ensure prosperity. But their prayers turned to screams when the ritual went awry. Instead of a holy blessing, they unleashed a vengeful spirit of fire, one that demanded sacrifice. The town of Black Hollow was not on any map. Nestled deep within a forgotten forest, its existence was known only to those who had the misfortune of stumbling upon it. Fog clung to the ground like a living thing, slithering between the gnarled roots of ancient trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something far more metallic, blood, perhaps. Elena's car had broken down miles back. She had followed the narrow dirt road in search of help, unaware that each step pulled her deeper into Black Hollow's embrace. The houses she passed were relics of a bygone era, wooden structures leaning at precarious angles, their windows dark and vacant like empty eye sockets. Yet, she felt eyes on her, hidden behind curtains that never moved. A sudden scream tore through the silence, sharp and distant. Elena froze, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to turn back, but the road behind her had vanished into the suffocating fog. Pressing forward was the only choice. The scream led her to an old church, its steeple cracked and tilting. The heavy wooden doors creaked open as if inviting her in. Inside, rows of pews sat in decay, and the altar was adorned not with a cross, but with a crude effigy of twisted branches and bones. Candles flickered, though no one was there to light them. "Help me." The whisper barely reached her ears. She turned slowly, scanning the shadows. A figure emerged, a woman, emaciated and trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "They'll come for you too," she rasped, pointing to the effigy. Before Elena could speak, the woman was yanked backward by unseen hands, disappearing into the darkness with a strangled cry. The church door slammed shut. Trapped, Elena's mind raced. The walls seemed to breathe, the shadows inching closer. Then she noticed it, scratches on the floor, leading to a trapdoor beneath the altar. With no other choice, she pried it open and descended into the cold blackness below.
As he turned back, he froze. The security camera monitor behind the counter showed a figure standing at pump 3. The figure was tall and cloaked in shadow, their features obscured. Ethan hadn't heard a car pull up, and the figure didn't appear to have a vehicle. He grabbed the microphone for the intercom. "Hey! Can I help you?" The figure didn't move. Ethan squinted at the monitor. The longer he stared, the more distorted the image became. The figure's outline shimmered and warped, as though the camera itself couldn't fully capture its presence. Suddenly, the lights above pump 3 flickered and went out. When they came back on, the figure was gone. Ethan's stomach churned. He debated calling his manager but decided against it. The last thing he wanted was to sound like he couldn't handle a simple night shift. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. The night air was cold and carried an unnatural stillness. Ethan shone his flashlight around the pumps, finding nothing unusual. As he turned to head back inside, he noticed something on the ground. A single, wet footprint, bare, human, and impossibly large, led away from pump 3 and into the darkness beyond the station's lights. Ethan hurried back inside, locking the doors behind him. He tried to focus on his phone, but the unease was overwhelming. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside made him jump. At 2:13 a.m., the power went out. The station was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. Ethan cursed under his breath and fumbled for his flashlight. As he turned it on, the beam illuminated the aisles, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, like someone tapping gently on the glass door. Ethan's flashlight beam wavered as he turned it toward the entrance. A figure stood just outside, their face obscured by the glare of the light. "We're closed," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, unmoving. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just at the door anymore, it came from the windows, the walls, even the ceiling. It surrounded him. Ethan backed up, his breathing ragged. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the figure outside seemed to multiply. There were dozens of them now, all identical, all standing perfectly still.
The village of Eldergrove had always been shrouded in mystery. Nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, its people spoke in hushed tones about the woods beyond their borders. Legends told of voices carried on the wind, of shadows that moved against the moonlight, and of those who ventured in, never to return. Marla had heard these stories her entire life. Yet, as a skeptic and a lover of folklore, she couldn't resist the allure of the whispering woods. Determined to uncover the truth behind the tales, she packed her belongings and set out alone as the sun dipped below the horizon. The forest greeted her with a chilling silence. The towering trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to lean inward, forming a canopy that blotted out the sky. As Marla pressed deeper, the air grew colder, and the faint sound of whispers began to drift through the branches. She paused, straining to understand, but the words were unintelligible, soft, sibilant murmurs that seemed to echo within her mind. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Marla marked her path with ribbons of red cloth, but each time she turned back, the markers were gone. Trees shifted subtly, paths that once seemed clear became twisted, and the forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Panic clawed at her, but curiosity kept her moving forward. She stumbled upon a clearing where the ground was littered with decaying bones and trinkets, evidence of others who had dared to enter. In the center stood an enormous oak tree, its bark blackened and cracked, oozing a dark, sap-like substance. Faces appeared in the bark, distorted and screaming, as if trapped within. The whispers grew louder, resolving into anguished cries and beckoning calls. Drawn by a force beyond understanding, Marla approached the tree. A hollow in its trunk seemed to gape like a mouth, exhaling a foul, cold breath. As she leaned closer, she heard her own name whispered among the voices. A cold hand gripped her shoulder, though no one stood behind her.